Welcome back to my channel, JDJ Planet, and to my podcast, God is an Artist. I am excited to share these magazines with you. These magazines are called Young People Moving Forward. They are produced by a publishing company called Forward Books. Larry Rogers is one of the partners of the Creative Spot. I actually met him through this book. This young lady here, she was a part of Drumming for Peace, and she was really excited to share that she had been featured on the cover of this magazine. She invited us to her book signing, which was held at her church, and that is where I met Larry. And these magazines are so cool. They're $10. And they're really cool if you want to keep them on your coffee table, or you want to keep them in the bathroom, keep them in your car. And it's just a really, really great way to represent our young black kids here in the area. This is the latest issue. This young man, he's an artist named Brock Seals. He does murals, portraits of famous people. And it's just really cool that St. Louis has a lot of talent and a lot of art here. Larry gave us an ad in this magazine, the Creative Spot nonprofit organization. Down here, this QR code, when you scan it, it'll lead you to the volunteer page where you can come and support the Giving Art campaign. Because while we're raising money to give art, we're also trying to raise awareness and get people plugged in, get people involved to help us with giving art to the community. This is his family here, his wife and his son. And one of the parts of this, when I read it here, was talking about a book that they just released. Here we go. Recently, Larry, Paris, and Langston released their new book, A Family That Prays Together Succeeds Together, from their children publishing company, Forward Books. This 200-page journal is designed to emphasize the importance of prayer in a family dynamic and how writing their prayers down can inspire them to pursue their purpose and succeed in life. If you're interested in getting you one of these really cool magazines, great way to represent our young people once again, then give me a comment in the comment section and I'll connect you to Larry. It's fascinating, when I think about a successful family and prayer within family, we're not just talking about families that succeed financially, right? Financial success is definitely a blessing. It's definitely a blessing to have financial freedom, the ability to put a roof over your kids' head, clothes on their backs, and food on the table. And then any recreational things that your kids want to get into. But it's also important to think about success as emotional success, mental success, and ultimately spiritual success. And honestly, it's cool because today's video is about the success of a family who helped to save the Israelites once again from the hands of an evildoer. Last week, I mentioned parental sacrifice. How does God handle parental sacrifice? But I'm realizing that sacrifice is not the right word to describe this story. This is the story of Esther and how God used her and her cousin Mordecai, who raised her as his own daughter, to save the Israelites. And so to just recap this story so that I don't make a long video again. Honestly, I try to make the videos at least 30 minutes or less, 25 minutes, 20 minutes. The last video I had to edit 52 minutes worth of content. And while I love the Word of God, I love reading the Bible, my life is really full and I have a lot of things to give my time to. And so, definitely read for yourself. You don't have to take this summary for what I give you. It's just like a way to summarize the story of Esther. And so in the story, we are in Persia, and King Xerxes had requested for Queen Vashti to come in and to basically show off her beauty to the people who were in the palace and the people who were in the king's quarters. And Vashti was like, I'm not coming because I don't want to do that. It doesn't say like exactly why, right? Maybe she didn't want to be paraded like a prize, like Queen Jasmine from Aladdin, right? She refused to come and be paraded like a trophy. And so King Xerxes was furious about that, and he had her banished. And he was like, dang, I guess I need a new queen now. So let me go and send out I think it was a decree or something that says, hey, Persia, I am looking for a new queen and I want to invite concubines to become part of my harem so I can choose a new queen. And Esther had happened to be chosen to be a part of that group. She ended up winning the contest and she became queen. And that is how she enters into the story. Haman is an Agagite and he is honored by the king, and he's kind of like full of himself, very much like Pharaoh from the last story. My name is the great name. My power is the greatest power, and I expect everyone to recognize me as the powerful one. And so when Mordecai decided not to bow to him, and when Mordecai decided not to honor him as such, because Mordecai is faithful and loyal to the Lord, so he won't bow to anyone else, Haman decided that, okay, since you don't want to bow to me, you're making me furious. I am going to order all the Jews in the kingdom to be killed. So you can blame yourself. Execution for your people. And so at this time, Esther, she hadn't disclosed to the king like who she is to him. And Mordecai, he pleads to Esther to help. Like, hey, you need to go to the king and you need to tell him what's going on so that we don't get killed. And she agrees to help. She exposes Haman to the king. The king has Haman killed. He's actually impaled on a pole that he had set up to have Mordecai impaled on. And then the Jews war against their enemies for their freedom. They win the war. All of their enemies ended up being intimidated by them. And Mordecai is hailed as a hero. I wanted to go through this, as we talk about parenthood. How did God design parenthood? How does God handle parental shortcomings? And in this case, we're going to talk about, how does God handle when a child loses their parents, right? He calls the village, right? It takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to survive and thrive in this world. The book of Esther definitely demonstrates how powerful the village is. And so I'm going to read a couple of verses that stuck out to me in terms of this concept, and we're going to just continue to talk about it. So I'm in Esther chapter 2, verse 5, and it says here, now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, among those captive with Jehoiakim, king of Judah. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This young woman, who was known as Esther, had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. And so Hadassah is her Jewish name, and Esther is her Persian name. And I believe the name Esther means hidden. I meant to look that up before I started, but I can put a link to the source, a supporting source to that statement, to that piece of information. The name Esther means hidden, and so we'll get into what that means for the story in a second. But yeah, when a child is without their parent, God calls on that child's village, which happened to be, Mordecai. He was like, okay, I'll raise her and she'll be my daughter. I'll raise her as my own daughter. And Mordecai was a great father to her. Mordecai raised her right, raised her well. And it was because of the way he brought her up that the Jews who were about to be slaughtered at Haman's command were saved. Jumping down to verse 10 in chapter 2, Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. Every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was doing and what was happening to her, right? And so when she was chosen to be a part of the harem, she had to leave the the citadel to go into the king's palace. And that's his baby. Like, that's his daughter. And if my daughter, and I'm pretty sure, well, I'm not even going to say pretty sure, I know for a fact that if our daughter was chosen for something crazy like this, it would be crazy in today's times, but it's not crazy back then. We would be checking on her. As a matter of fact, when Naeli was born, when my daughter was born, my husband and I, we both had COVID, and during that time, since she was born in 21, I think they were only allowing like one guest, but because he and I both had it, we couldn't have any guests. And my mother and my grandmother, they kind of camped out at the hospital. They were in one cafe area, and then when they were told they couldn't be there anymore, they would go to another cafe area. And so the village, right? Just like my folks were there when we couldn't have visitors, technically, Mordecai was there on the outside, making sure she was okay. So she never was alone. She never was without her family. And so let's see here, jumping down to verse 15. When the turn came for Esther, the young woman Mordecai had adopted, the daughter of his uncle Abihail, to go to the king, she asked for nothing other than what Haggai, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the harem, suggested, and Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. I'm sure during this harem, when the other concubines were requesting stuff, they probably were requesting stuff in a selfish manner. They were probably requesting large things, right? And I don't know what Haggai suggested. I need to look that up. But like Esther, she didn't ask for much. She only asked for so much. And I think it was her humility that won the king's favor. And I am under the impression that she was able to be humble. She was raised to be humble, raised by Mordecai. Thankfully, the village that God called to raise Esther, to raise Hadassah when her parents died, was already a source of humility for her. And she could grow to be a humble person. Still in chapter 2, at the end, or near the end, starting in verse 19. When the virgins were assembled the second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. But Esther had kept her family background and nationality. Had kept secret her family background and nationality, just as Mordecai had told her to do so. For she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up, right? One of the main verses that I used to begin this series was in the book of Proverbs that mentioned train a child in the way that they must go, so that way they'll never depart from it, right? And this is like an example of that. I also have here highlighted, continuing on with verse 21, during the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And when the report was investigated and found to be true, the two officials were impaled on poles. All of this was recorded in the book of Annals in the presence of the king. And so it's interesting. This is like a interesting domino effect, an interesting ripple effect. Esther joins the group of concubines to become a part of the harem that would eventually decide who was the new queen. Esther becomes the new queen, and Mordecai, being her adoptive father, being someone who loved her very much, he stayed near the palace to watch out for her. And so it was because of this that he was able to catch or eavesdrop on this plot to kill the king, right? What if Esther didn't become the new queen? What if it was somebody else? Then the king would have definitely been killed by these two people. Esther gave Mordecai the credit. At this time, she still hadn't revealed like who she is, and she still hadn't revealed who Mordecai is to her because he had instructed her not to. Let's see here. And so next chapter talks about Haman, which I got into. Of course, Mordecai didn't want to bow to Haman. Haman was mad. Haman orders all the Jews to be killed, right? More of that power trip stuff, right? Of course, going back to the lovely sign that that couple had: when the power of love defeats the love of power, then the world will know peace. And this is another example of that statement. The Bible is filled with that dynamic, that spiritual war, stories of that. And it's inspiring because, that's kind of what we see today, especially in politics, right? The love of power is constantly defeating the power of love. But there might be like an uprising, right? There might be some shift on the way in regards to that. Chapter 4. So Mordecai persuades Esther to help. So I am in verse 6. So Hathach went to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show Esther and explain it to her. And he had told him to instruct her to go to the king's presence and beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Now, it was a law that no one could enter into the king's presence without permission, otherwise they would be killed. And so, or he would allow it. He would extend his golden scepter to the person who arrived unannounced, and they were spared. And so Esther, she was like, Mordecai, if I go in there and I wasn't summoned, he's gonna kill me. Like, I might die. And Mordecai, he was like, and I'm pretty sure, when we think about upbringings, when we think about healthy upbringings, which Mordecai seemed to have given her, despite the fact that her parents were dead, that there's always that one person who knows how to talk to you, who knows how to encourage you, how to inspire you, and how to empower you in the face of fear. And so, Mordecai is asking her to do a really big thing to save the people, the Jews, from being annihilated. And Esther is scared, which rightfully so, right? Because if the law is this, you'll be killed, right? Then you're essentially risking your life to save the lives of your people. And so Mordecai tells her in response to that here in verse 14, he says, "For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." Right? Interesting. That's a popular phrase right now in the political world and amongst women and others who are called by God to do stuff. God orchestrates stuff. God puts stuff in place. Different things play out. And there comes a realization that, maybe I was put in this position for such a time as this, right? And interestingly, God is not mentioned in this story. Like, his name is not mentioned, but we already know that Mordecai and Esther belong to the tribe of Judah, the tribe of Benjamin, who had a history of being faithful to the Lord. And so Esther sent a reply to Mordecai. She said, "Go gather all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions, right? And so she was afraid first. And then, Mordecai had encouraged her and inspired her, saying, this is probably your purpose right now. This is probably why all of these different things, had played out, right? And you could say, okay, Haman would not have threatened the Jews if Mordecai had just bowed to him. As a matter of fact, he wouldn't even know Mordecai if Esther wasn't the queen and Mordecai wasn't hanging around the palace. But like we just talked about, if Esther was not the queen, the king would have been assassinated anyway by his previous guards. She instructs him to tell the others to fast, don't eat or drink for 3 days. And she accepts whatever her fate is, right? At this moment, she doesn't know what her fate is. She knows what the law is, right? Her natural knowledge tells her that I could possibly be killed if I go talk to the king. And her spiritual knowledge was like, okay, go fast. So she already knows what fasting does. She already knows that fasting empties the body and you're no longer depending on yourself for survival, for nourishment. You're depending directly on God. And it is this act that gets God to respond. And let me see here. Okay, so it says, when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. She makes her requests. Haman is found to be guilty. And Mordecai, like I said, is hailed as the hero. What's interesting about all three of these stories that I have shared in regards to God handling parental shortcomings, God handling, callings for individual Jews, all three of them, Moses, Joseph, and Esther, had unusual childhoods, right? Joseph's brothers, he was despised by his siblings, right? They were jealous of him and they tried to have him killed, right? Moses' mother surrendered him to an enemy nation, to Egypt. And Esther, or Hadassah, she was raised by her cousin, right? She was adopted by her cousin after her parents had died. And, kids who have unusual upbringings, God tends to choose them, right? They're the chosen ones. The kids who had every odd against them, right? Joseph could have very well ended up dead at some point, but because he remained faithful to God, he was elevated to being the king's right-hand man, Pharaoh's right-hand man. Not the Pharaoh that tried to kill Moses, but the Pharaoh, I think one or two pharaohs before. And then Moses, he could have very well just stayed away from Egypt after he ran away and he got married and he was in the wilderness, in the desert for I think 40 years. When God called him to his great purpose, he remained faithful to God. God remained faithful to him, and he was able to deliver the Israelites from Egypt. And then Esther here, right? Her faithfulness to God, which was demonstrated by her instruction to have everyone fast, was what moved God to, I guess, soften the heart of this king. Faithfulness to God while being chosen by God sets you up for a purpose that involves delivering people from something, right? Attached to your purpose is great deliverance, right? And so if you're a parent and you had to, extended favoritism toward a child that caused the other children to despise them, or you had to surrender your child to another group and you couldn't be the parent that you wanted to be, or God forbid, right, you're a kid whose parents passed away and you were taken in by a family member, adopted by a family member, right? Then you, as long as you remain faithful to the Lord, there's something great attached to you. And I know, like, when people read the Bible, some people have the perspective that, oh, you shouldn't put yourself in the Bible. You shouldn't make the Bible about you. And the thing about it is the word of God reveals how God functions, how God operates, who God is as our artist, as our orchestrator. And if God can orchestrate deliverance like this throughout these 3 stories, then you can expect God to orchestrate deliverance in the same way for your own life. Whether you're a parent who has it all together, a parent who is struggling, a child who has it all together, or a child who is struggling, God can work with it all. And as long as you remain faithfully participating in God's orchestration, then you will see the result of that. You will see favor. You will see deliverance. And this is how God operates. If you feel like your calling, your destiny is attached to the deliverance of many people, and you are feeling discouraged, you are feeling worried, right? Just like Esther, maybe God has you in the position that he has you for such a time as this, right? Just like these young people in these magazines. And he has a lot of these. This one is from last year and this one is from this year. He releases 4 editions every year, so quarterly. And all these young people, I think it said in the one about Island here, it was talking about how she was shy and, didn't quite believe in herself. But over time, participating in different programs and being a part of different movements and tapping into her village, her church, she has found great purpose in being herself. We have to support our young people. And whenever we as parents fall short, whenever we as parents fail, we can count on God to pick up where we slack, where we lack. And there's so much comfort in that, right? There's comfort in knowing that God will do his part. God will bless us. God will help us, and he will continue to save us. No parent has to stress themselves out over not having it all together, right? Raising kids is challenging. Being a parent is challenging. Trying to remember all the doctor's appointments, all the milestones, trying to, figure out what your child wants to eat. And they sometimes like it, sometimes they don't, right? Trying to navigate your child's emotions whenever they have outbursts, right? It's challenging, and those challenges can definitely be discouraging when you're trying to have it all together and you don't. And so whenever you fall short, whenever you fail, you can expect God to have your back and do his part. With that being said, that is the parent series. I started this series back in May and I meant to end it in June, but I felt led to, because these 3 stories, I was going to do them all in one video, but I felt led to do them all at the same, or do them all separately. So we could dive into them a little deeper. And so next series, how did God design salvation? How did God design sanctification? And how did God design surrender? This particular series is definitely for the brand new believer and the returning believer, anyone deconstructing from legalism, anyone deconstructing from rebellion, and you are genuinely wanting to get to know who God is, who he is, how he operates, and why all of this stuff is the way that it is. Check out that series, and I will see you then.